Okay, next up is Cookmancer Online, a LitRPG GameLit novel, VR verse book number 1, written by Nera Vivaldi. It is 266 pages, $3.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. The goal is simple. Level up and earn enough points to pay for my mother's medical needs. I'm Kayla, and I want to soar through the air and command the wind as a feared and respected Airmancer in an online Gothic fantasy world. I've collected what experience we needed, but someone decided victory shouldn't be mine. I got hacked, and they used my points to build on a build used for mule accounts. Now, apparently, I cook. I do magic with my food, but not by choice. Not only do I have to deal with that, but I have to survive a world filled with the undead, vampires, and a group of people who think I should suffer some more. With the help of my friends, a flesh-golem, fairy illusionist, and a shapeshifter, we put a plan into place to prove to my enemies I can win and help my mom with flower power. There you go. So that's the story. Fundamentally, I didn't like this story, though. It's not badly written, but I never connected to the main character. And I kind of didn't like her at the beginning. I came to kind of enjoy her character arc a little bit better as the story progresses. But the beginning of the story kind of puts the main character in a victim role in the story, which just didn't feel right to how she was acting, how she behaved, and the much stronger personality I think that the main character had, and it's developed as the story continues on. While from a writing standpoint and storytelling standpoint, I understand that the author is giving the main character these hardships. It's just the way it was developed. It felt abrasive. No, abrasive. It didn't work for me. I don't want to spoil how it didn't work for me. And I understand that the author is also trying to convey things about a cultural issue that is very much true, but fundamentally the beginning of the story was it just didn't work for me. There you go, and that's perfectly okay. It will connect with other readers, which is perfectly fine. But for me, the story in the whole didn't work. And part of the issue was the fact that the story is set in a far-flung universe, far-flung future, where humanity is saved from environmental catastrophe and from social destruction by an AI, an artificial intelligence that works for governments to preserve and better humanity. Like, this AI is supposed to be incorporated into all aspects of life, so much so that all housing woes and all food woes and issues have been solved. People don't starve anymore. People don't have housing issues. And people can actually work and do things to please the AI or to further quests given by the artificial intelligence and get social credits so that they can then use to do purchase bonuses that the AI has done, like super advanced medical procedures, which is kind of the fundamental hook for the story, and why the main character is in this game world trying to get these social credits by playing in the game, completing quests, and also doing social quests in real life, which is kind of an interesting twist there. In that by doing these things, the main character is supposed to be collecting these social credits, which she can then use to get her mother newly regrown eyes. Her mom currently has artificial eyes, but they're not best, which is a perfectly fine premise. But for me, all those things sound so interesting. They really did, but they weren't developed. As far as an explanation of why they occur, or going into any real depth about this futuristic world that is existing. And I thought it was such a missed opportunity, because had that existed, I probably would have connected to the story better, but it wasn't. So for me, it kind of felt like this story was floating on this kind of very, I want to say, what's the word? Surface level material of the story world, and also that translated very much in the game world. That was the same case. The game mechanic world, the game world was also very superficial as far as the explanations of how the game mechanics worked. There was no real numbers thrown around. It's all very much, oh, I cast this thing and it did a thing, without any real explanation of costs for stamina, mana points, whatever the case is, or very vague damage numbers. And that was just a lack of depth in the story, and the storytelling, the world building was kind of the thing that made me oh, this probably could have been could have been good with a little more depth of these elements. And that's definitely a writing decision. I don't that's the author's choice. It just meant that I didn't connect with the story or the main character or her plight in this instance. So now on the subject of the game mechanics, again, the depth doesn't exist. There are lots of notifications. A lot of the story exists in the game. Not all of it, but a good portion of it still exists outside of the game, which was kind of an issue for me because it didn't really. That's beside the point, though. As far as the game mechanics, though, they exist. It's set in this MMO game universe, and you can tell the author probably has some experience being a gamer, which is fine. But again, there's kind of a lack of depth in the explanation for the game mechanics and also balance for them. And also, as the title of a Cookmancer, I kind of thought there was going to be more cooking, and it ended up being that the main character summons ingredients at will, any kind of ingredients, even though she's never maybe come across them in real life. She can kind of summon whatever she wants to, and it ends up being a tool where she drops them on somebody to give them a debuff or to have some interesting effect, like dropping powder on somebody to kind of show that they're invisible or something like that. And while I definitely see an interesting application of those aspects, it's like, oh, that's kind of superficial, and there's no real cost again to those actions necessarily. It costs just as much to summon, a jar of honey as it would be a giant bag of flour potentially, or actually there's no cost given, which is an issue for me. But again, so the game mechanics are just not in depth, which was an issue for me. As for my enjoyment goes, overall, novel didn't work for me. Just didn't really satisfy the LitRPG itch. I actively disliked the beginning again. And while the eventual storyline development, especially the end, was satisfying enough that it kind of mitigated some of that, it was definitely an uphill battle for me to read. And I gotta say, the story kind of feels like it's potentially a right to market attempt from somebody who's used to writing another kind of novel. There's really well developed emotional stakes. And again, this is kind of what bugs me, that the emotional side of this was definitely better developed. Like, there's definitely a depth to what the main character feels and the expression of that, and what her issue is with her, jerky boyfriend and his sleaziness and his bad behavior, and how she's trying to help her mother and their conversations. You can definitely feel the emotional development there, which is kind of nice. But that same depth isn't carried into the world building. It's not carried into the game mechanics, which is especially disappointing for somebody who loves game mechanics and a lit RPG story. So for me, those just made it a less entertaining for me. So much so that I give it a 6 out of 10, which means not that it's a bad story necessarily. It just doesn't work for me. I had issues with it, which I've stated about. If you may like this more, I couldn't get around those issues, unfortunately. So for me, I didn't enjoy this. That's Cookmancer Online with a score of 6 out of 10.